Jessica, it's great to catch up with you today. Though we have never worked together, our paths have crisscrossed a few times as I've worked with a number of Berkeley people who you have worked with when you were at Berkeley. And I had previously applied for and interviewed for jobs at Vanderbilt, where you're currently at. Of course, we do similar research and we teach similar classes. So it's great to catch up with you today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you.
Well, as you think back on your research, are there 2 to 3 simple, practical, underappreciated lessons you've learned that you'd most like to pass along to others?
Yes, absolutely. Especially when I'm like talking with executives about the research, it's become clearer to me like the things that people really need to know in practice. And like one of the most common questions that I get from people navigating organizational issues around gender, is in essence like, what does the research show about how I can fix these people? Like I'm having a problem with my boss. What do I do to like get this person to stop discriminating against me? And there's really like a lot of focus on changing other people. And I think this is where the idea that bias is unconscious and it's pervasive is like actually not very helpful, because when I look in my data at discriminatory behavior, it's usually driven by like 10 to 15% of the sample giving relatively extreme reactions. And so while that's not to deny that unconscious bias exists and we should be aware of it, a lot of the situations that I hear about that are really damaging to people are situations where like they need to leave. And so I think it might actually be helpful to know that a lot of the data actually, when I look at it, show that it's like a small percentage. And we don't want to try to fix those people. If we want to use a market solution, because the majority of people are not in that sample, we could definitely go out and kind of try to be resourceful and resilient and like find a new opportunity. Just like if we were in, say, an abusive relationship, we wouldn't stick around like trying to fix the other person, we would leave. And so I think that's one thing that's come out of the data that I like hope is really helpful to women in those situations. Another thing that I think is probably helpful to them is to realize that while lost pay or like potentially forgone promotions are definitely an issue and it's a reason to leave these situations sooner, a lot of like the ongoing damage I think happens to people's motivation, and it comes from the beliefs that being in those situations instill in the women themselves. And so I think a lot of the healing that comes is about leaving and getting into a healthier situation. And then it's about looking at those beliefs that like a toxic organization created in you and fixing those, becoming like a more accurate mirror to yourself. So those are the things that kind of come to mind from my research that I hope help women who are not in good work situations.
I think this is really interesting. And I've not heard this data, Jessica. I literally just this morning completed the mandatory DEI training for the university. And so are you saying then that in these organizations, it's not that people don't have unconscious biases? Sure, people have biases, and I teach ethics, and this week we've been talking about some of the biases that we have. But are you saying that the women who, when women are facing the discrimination in the workplace, in order to overcome that or to find a great place to work, it isn't so much as important as trying to cure or teach about biases as it is identify the people who may really be holding you back. And if you're in an organization where you are being held back because of your gender, the likelihood is that it's these minority group of people with extreme discriminatory behaviors. Or how do you think about that in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that the unconscious bias research is like certainly important, and we can use structures and processes to try to eliminate its impact on our decisions. So I think that's why we've heard a lot about it. But I think it has just had this like unintended negative consequence of leaving people unsure of what to do when they're in situations where it's not that they're being recommended for more, say, stereotypically feminine roles, or that the bias against them that they're telling me about, it's not small, it's not, slight, it's not unconscious, it's much more of like a full-blown obfuscation of like bad intentions. For instance, someone who's performing really well but evokes a lot of threat, is then given like a notice of poor performance, and maybe her boss acknowledges like, hey, someone else wants me to sign this, wants me to ask you to sign this. I don't really believe in this, but look, this is what they want me to do. And then you figure out like, well, it's because they don't want to give me carried interest at this private equity fund, or they don't want to give me this promotion, and they're trying to cover their tracks. Like, I hear about more extreme situations. And I think that when people think, well, this is just what people are like to women, then like they're not motivated to go out and leave when there are better opportunities out there. And so I just think differentiating like extremely intentional toxic behavior from unconscious bias is a worthwhile thing to do, because we can navigate unconscious bias with one set of solutions, but sometimes we really do need to get serious about more, extreme reactions. I think not just staying in the job and trying to navigate it when we see more overt bias, and that's what I hear from executives just way too often, that they're facing more overt like types of bias in their organizations.
Okay, so yeah, I think I got it then. So the unconscious bias, if you're being held back by unconscious bias, then that's there's a whole set of kind of processes and solutions that you'd want to implement. But if it's these extreme versions of discrimination, trying to use the solutions that we would use for unconscious bias are not going to work, because it's not unconscious bias in many of these instances. It's overt, just discriminatory, toxic behavior. And so there would be a different set of solutions, which might include actually just leaving and finding a better place to work.
Mm-hmm. And I just hope people maintain hope that like that is possible. It's possible to do that. The pervasiveness of unconscious bias doesn't make that impossible.
Yeah, great. Okay, any other lessons that you'd like to share today?
The other thing that's been on my mind has really been about the way that we're so polarized right now in talking about DEI issues. Like, I'm really worried that the polarization is going to kind of tear the country apart. And this is one of the key issues where we really see it. And I think that is unnecessary, because historically, equality of opportunity was something that like Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, like both cared about, because we recognize that if we're going to have hierarchies and we're going to have inequality in society, well, then we need to be sure that we've been thoughtful about how we are allocating power and status and opportunity, and there needs to be mobility. And that used to be something I think we all recognized. We would disagree about whether doing the right things would lead to equality of outcome. And I think it's just worth realizing that there was that historical debate. But it's not that DEI issues are like only a liberal issue. Like, if you're trying to create an equitable, stable society, then we all need to be concerned about whether equality of opportunity for people with similar skills, similar abilities is available. So I'd really like to kind of bring that concept back into the dialogue.
Yeah, if you ask people, and I don't know, I'm assuming there's data on this, but if you ask people, how much are you in favor of equality of opportunity? I would imagine, to your point, the vast majority of people would say, yes, we want everyone to have great opportunities and everybody have the opportunity to thrive. It makes me think of an interview I had recently with John Busenbark at Notre Dame. And he was finding that in some of his research, we think that we like the people we like and we dislike the people that we don't like. And he especially finds this in politics. But in reality, we like the people we like, but we tend to hate the people we dislike. And so the magnitude of difference is much larger on the side of hate. It just seems like in the social media world, where we don't interact with people face to face, and we just do it through text, we dehumanize them, as we talk about and ethics, and then it just leads to so much more division where we start fighting over things that in reality we probably agree about, but there's some dehumanization, and then because it's a contentious, difficult topic, we tend to hate these people because we don't really appreciate them for being human and interact with them on a personal level.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine hating other people. Gosh, that's a big problem. I look forward to hearing about his data, but that's a sad trend.
Yeah, just the magnitude is just, and he said it. You especially find this in politics, where when people think about the if they're part of one party and they think about the other party, it's not that they dislike them; it's that the dislike becomes really strong to the point of, he said, the word hate comes to mind. So, any other thoughts you'd like to wrap up with?
No, I think that will do it.
Well, Jessica, I really appreciate your time. It's so great to be able to chat with you, as we have so many overlapping interests. I look forward to sharing these lessons with my students and my children, and try to remember these as well. And just want to thank you again for sharing your time with me today.
Thank you for doing this. It's really a gift to have this record. I look forward to watching other people's.
Great, thanks.